There are many things to admire about Emme.
Her football knowledge,
Papa's cupcakeria mastery,
volleyball skills,
and her capacity to be a great best friend,
as well as a sister.
One thing that I admire most, though, is her selflessness.
Emme is the type of person to drop everything to help someone else.
While I appreciate her willingness to do anything for others, I also understand that her inability to say no can
Be a curse as well as a blessing.
I hope that through her message, others like her can learn that it's okay to put their needs first.
Without further ado, here's my favorite sister
And best friend, Emme Veselka.
Have you ever heard of or experienced an irrational fear? An irrational fear is something that you're afraid of, even though it's not likely to actually hurt you. Almost everyone experiences irrational fears, whether it's of spiders, public speaking, or of geese, which are terrifying, by the way. And when I was in my sophomore year of high school, one of my irrational fears prevented me from getting the help that I needed. For almost a year, I kept quiet about a problem I was facing because I was afraid to ask for help. It all started on a trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico. While sitting at a diner with my family, I felt a weird pressure form in my left ear, and all of a sudden my ear began to ring. I didn't think much of it at first until I realized that popping my ear wasn't fixing it. I started to worry since I knew that ear damage could be permanent, but I decided to wait and see if it would feel better in the morning. When nothing had changed, my parents took me to an emergency care center where I was told that the problem was probably just because of allergies, and once I got back to Austin, everything would go back to normal. But after a few days back at home, nothing had seemed to change, and so once again I sat on the crinkly paper in a doctor's office, and once again I was told that the problem was probably just because of allergies. Deep down, I felt that the real issue was not because of the sneezing attacks that I got from oak pollen, but I'm not a doctor, so I took the medicine prescribed to me and waited. This time, though, I waited for a year. Now, you're probably thinking that I was insane to live an entire year just ignoring the constant ringing in my left ear. But truthfully, it didn't affect me that much, or I just didn't let it. I was anxious to approach my parents about my hearing again, and I didn't want a professional to verify my problem, so I decided to just handle it myself. I learned to adapt to only hearing out of my right ear, and began with having my friends walk to the right of me and sitting in the front of class. I coped by joking about my bad hearing, and I really convinced myself that emotionally and physically I was fine. It wasn't until my junior year, when I struggled to hear a classmate in chemistry, that I finally spoke up about my hearing again. I remember getting frustrated while working on my classwork with a peer, and having to turn my head every single time she said something. At first, I pushed my annoyance aside and thought, this is just something else I can handle. But eventually, I started noticing every single time I made an adjustment to compensate for my hearing loss. After taking in how much I had changed in order to avoid getting help, I finally realized that I had to find the courage to talk to my parents. But finding courage isn't something that's easily done when you're scared. But luckily, I started telling myself things like, you can do this. Asking your parents for help won't be a burden on them. And this is important. And I kept saying these things in my head until I finally believed them. Eventually, I talked with my parents, and we scheduled another appointment, and it was finally time to go to an audiologist. Luckily, my doctor decided to try some things out first before declaring what was wrong, and I began to hope that maybe everything could just go back to the way it was. I started taking some more medicine, not for allergies this time, got an MRI, did blood testing, and tried to figure out what caused all of this in the first place. But after searching for months, the cause of my hearing loss could not be found, and the doctors determined that I needed a hearing aid. As of today, I've had my hearing aid for over 2 months, and I'm so grateful that I can hear in 360 degrees again. I've learned so much from losing part of my hearing, like finding ways to be thankful in times of loss, trusting your gut, not burying your emotions, but most importantly for me, I've learned to not fear asking for help. I felt guilty for what happened to me, and I felt even more guilty asking my parents for help because I didn't want to stress them out more than they already had been. But what I realize now is that being fearful and feeling ashamed to ask others for help only does you more harm in the long run. But I know that in the moment, anxiety towards asking for help can feel really overwhelming. And luckily for me, I found a couple of methods that have helped me push through it. As I did with my parents, one of the first things I try when I feel that anxiety start to build up is I start doing self-talk. And this can look different from person to person, but as I feel my heart start beating really fast, I'll take some deep breaths and repeat phrases to myself like, I can do this, and I am strong. And if I'm still struggling, another tactic I use is writing down exactly what I want to say on a piece of paper. It seems like a small thing to do, but having a specific sentence can really help me find the courage I need since I know exactly what I want to say. And while I've found ways to push through when I'm feeling scared, the truth is this is something I'm still going to struggle with in the future. You can't just get rid of an irrational fear. That's why they're called irrational. But finding what works to calm them is an essential part of overcoming your fears. And now I want to leave you with this quote from Bear Grylls to remind you that overcoming your irrational fears is possible. And he says, "Being brave isn't about the absence of fear. Being brave is having that fear but finding a way through it." Thank you.